Thank you so much for choosing to listen to Happy Times and Places, which is a positively inclined Doctor Who commentary podcast in which I, Toby Hadoke, get a special guest to choose an episode of Doctor Who and nominate their favourite things about it, and I have to guess what those favourite things are.
Hi Toby, it's thanks for having me on. For the multitudes out there who don't know me, my name's Jeremy Radick, and I played Gareth in the Doctor Who TV movie. And for the past 25 years, I've been shamelessly exploiting that to get me into exciting predicaments like this. And now it's brought me here to my basement to talk to you about Inferno.
Well, Project Inferno is dead. Long live Project Inferno, because eagle-eyed viewers will have noticed that the world ended in Doctor Who last week. Unfortunately, it was a world that was slightly different from ours, so it doesn't really matter that everyone in it is dead. But that concept aside, I've been back and I've checked the scores. Jeremy Radick, my special guest actor from Doctor Who, the TV movie, and plenty more since, who's also been doing lots of other interesting things, which you'll hear about at the end of this podcast, is on 4 points. And I am on 2 points, because I have chosen what he has chosen twice out of 6 occasions. But this being the final episode, we get 2 goes. We get to choose one thing about this episode and another bonus favourite thing overall. And so, if I get both of the things this time around, we tie, which for me in this podcast series is a victory. So there's something to hold out for, eh? I mean, the chances of me doing it, I think, are fairly slim, but let's have a bash. So I am going to press select on episode 7 of Inferno in 3, 2, 1. Now, I mean, I won't tell you how. First of all, it didn't select. Then when it did, it seemed to take forever. So I'm very sorry for those of you trying to sync up. But that's part of the fun. So this is the climax, of course, of Jon Pertwee's first season, the climax of season 7, of which I am a massive, massive fan. It seemed to me to match more with how I imagined the Jon Pertwee era would be from having read the Target books, which so much of it wasn't. It was a bit more colourful. It was a bit less gritty than my mind had conjured from reading about it. And that, I think, was a conscious decision from Barry Letts. You know, the next story is colourful and zingier and funkier. And probably the right decision, because and whilst my taste then and now is more towards the gritty sort of stuff, you know, Doctor Who is not for 47-year-old men who were self-loathing youngsters. And of course, the rest of the Pertwee era is much loved and charming and comforting and jolly. But I'm also a great fan of Quatermass. So you know, this seems to me to have all the best elements of those. And Pertwee fits it like a glove. I mean, his hair is not very bouffant. But he does this. The dramatic stuff so well, and of course he's only just made it out of the alternative world. So that's the last we see of Greg and Petra and Elizabeth. They're dead. They've been swept away by lava. Very convincing, decent, convincing enough model shot of lava. Isn't it amazing actually what a difference it makes just having Petra with her hair down and in a flowery dress compared to the sort of buttoned up scientist gear she had and her hair up. And of course he's I bet he's got some high karate or Old Spice on as Greg Sutton with his flashy cravat. Yeah, do listen to my. I think it's in episode 3 of Too Much Information, my podcast going through every episode of Doctor Who in order. Facts, just the facts, ma'am, and the biography of Derek Newark that I've done, which makes for, a sad read in many ways. He had a tricky life, and he drank too much, and it's I think I always imagined life as an actor was full of just being in bars and being marvelous, and that was part of the attraction as well. And I didn't. It wasn't just the. I love this what they do with the camera and the drowning out with the sound, and the sort of the being taken over by alien and touching behind your ear and the being a bit of a funny noise is a bit of a cliche, and you only have to do it slightly differently. He doesn't touch the back of his ear. There is a noise. And it works, and I think that's a really effective thing. And obviously the sound is not only just blocking out what he can actually hear within the drama, but also it's like the primal urges are blocking out his engagement with the human world. It's really clever shorthand, and it's dramatic and it's effective, and every second counts. There was a quiz show with Michael Barrymore called Every Second Counts, and unfortunately it's a bit like when Helen Worth says Jim will fix it in Colony in Space. I'm sure somebody can go through Doctor Who and do a compilation of quiz shows mentioned in Doctor Who. Every Second Counts, which Jim will fix is not a quiz show. Other television shows. I'm sure this countdown is said quite a lot. Two Hearts. So was it? Yeah. So I imagine I didn't just want to be an actor and to be a performer, to do the work, which I do very much love. But I just imagined that was the life of, flicking a scarf and reading books and going to bars and hearing wonderful stories about other actors falling over. But of course, the reason a lot of actors hang out in bars is because of the work hours. Everybody finishes work very late and wants to let their hair down, and you get flexi hours if you work in the theatre. Get away with a lot, or in television. And there was a BBC bar at this time, of course, and a lot of actors are very shy in real life, so need the lubrication in order to facilitate the socialising, and in the short term it's great, and in the long term it's terrible. And he was only 65 when he died, Derek Newark, and I know actors who are still going strong at 95. So that's 30 years they've lived that he didn't have, because he drank himself to death, unfortunately. And it also, impacted on his career latterly as well. His time ran out, which I think is desperately sad. He's got a real attack. He's got a real energy about him, and he's got a likability about him. That's how I think he really works. Is that despite the tough guy stuff, and actually despite the sort of blokey stuff that he tries to do, that actually is a bit naff. Is Greg with the ladies, and I think it's sort of supposed to be a bit of, despite all of that, he's got a likability, a sort of vulnerable likability about him, but from having read about him, he plastered on fronts in real life, and they probably hid a real life vulnerability that he covered with bravado and booze. And it's not sustainable. Poor old Derek Newark. But I love him in this. I love all the performances in this, but I don't know why his is the sort, and I think it's because he's the sort of genuine, because what a lot of heroes in Doctor Who are quite sort of aren't quite so earthy, I think, and quite so sort of prosaic and down to earth and gutsy and perhaps of that again slightly more. You know, he has more in common with people in sort of perhaps more adult shows and genres, which again, this finds its basis in me as a kid who was, you know, worried about Doctor Who being taken seriously, and that sort of approach helps Doctor Who to be taken seriously. I love the fact that Doctor Who solves the problem by basically being asleep, but letting key points out. And this is a sort of thing. Could you do this in drama nowadays? It was a thing you could do. I'm thinking there's a terrible one in The Claws of Axos, isn't there? Where Bill Filer's going, must not distribute. And there's nobody in the room, so it doesn't serve the plot at all. Because nobody overhearing going, my God, they must not distribute Axonite. He's talking to nobody. There's nobody there. It's there because they want a scene for some reason. Whereas at least this is important because they hear what the Doctor's saying so they can impart the information. But could you have a thing now, excuse me, you know, where you have certain dramatic tropes that we took for granted then that you wouldn't do now? And I do think one of them is having somebody asleep saying stuff that's important that they then relay to other people. That's the other thing Newitt can do is because he's of that breed of sort of 60s angry young men actors, he's actually really good at shouting, at urgent shouting, which again... which not everyone can do because it has to be contained within the television as well. So it's not the same as sort of theatrical declamatoriness. It's from a slightly different school, and I like it. And he's good at it. Pertwee has a great face. So yeah, we're at the end of Pertwee's first year of a show that was hanging in the balance. It's an amazing metamorphosis of what Doctor Who was. I love the Troughton era. I love the War Games. I think season 6 struggles a bit. I think it could be condensed everywhere a little bit. But oh yes, and Petra comes good in the end. Just quietly goes, no, it's me. But the metamorphosis from what that show was at the end of the Troughton era to what John Pertwee did, and it rejuvenated and regenerated the series that was in a pretty parlous state. It's interesting with the War Games. I mean, the Radio Times coverage disappears to nothing, really. The viewing figures aren't great. And then we come back with Spearhead, which is all on film. So the difference between the War Games 10 and Spearhead 1 is, I mean, it's not just colour. It's the fact that it's colour and on film. So we get an accident there because it has to be on film. And then we get these where the money saved by being on Earth and these 7 episoders mean that you get really good looking productions. But then you've got a comedian. You've got John Pertwee, who's not really done dramatic television acting at all, and you know, he was a comic turn on the radio, and he did, you know, comedy type stuff when he was in films largely, which if you think about it is an extraordinary achievement for him. And it hadn't really occurred to me till I interviewed Sue Upton, who was production assistant on Doctor Who and the Silurians, who essentially said that this was his first sort of serious performance in an electronic studio, because of course Spearhead had all been on film, and it pretty much was. So that he was a bit nervous, and when he was nervous, he could be a bit sort of testy, Pertwee. But I think that all sorts sort of works because he's on sort of high alert, which means he's got this natural dandy thing. I mean, he pulls off his outfits so well, and Larry Turner is right. There's nobody that could. I mean, he's even got a chain round his neck there. There's nobody that could do Velvet Jacket, Freddie Churt, and a chain round your neck and not look like a bit of a Burke, and yet Pertwee doesn't. It fits him like a glove, and he looks magnificent, and he looks like Doctor Who. Yay! Christopher Benjamin's still alive. Keith Gold is still alive. This is really funny. Nicky's going, I think it's brilliant that you're not dead. He goes, yeah, I'm quite pleased as well. That's very funny. Yeah. I do love that. And of course, so Sir Keith is back. So it's not just the Doctor, but Sir Keith coming back really helps with the situation because Sir Keith doesn't die. I wonder if they could have been braver and actually had Sir Keith die, but he's so nice. You don't want him to, do you? Free will is not an illusion after all. Yes. Yeah, this is really nice. And I think Pertwee... And I don't think I've ever given Pertwee enough credit. I've always thought he's great. And he's quite throaty in this as well. You really feel, I don't know if that's an accident, if he just had a cold or whatever, but his vocalizing it does seem like he spent the past 3 weeks on a burning world. And I love the fact that it's so urgent for him that he hasn't really got time to say, look, can I just explain this to you? He's just like, get out of my way or I'll smash this to bits. And that could seem silly that, he hasn't sat down and explained it to them. But he's seen a world end. And it's a desperate situation for him. And I buy that. I think that totally works. So actually what makes the situation worse, the Doctor's reaction, is not the Doctor just reacting stupidly in order to expedite this next bit of the plot. It actually works perfectly within the thing. I like the way that Stallman just goes, yep, no, I didn't do that. And actually, because Sir Keith's quite timid, Petra's quite timid. There's a few people that learn to stand up for themselves, which I rather like. As somebody that inwardly is rather timid myself. And I think, for the viewer, it's... I think Sheila Dunn's doing a really good job in this episode. The look that she's got in her eye as if to say, I'm a bit worried about you. And Poole is doing this stuff very well, which is awkward. There's Keith Ashley. I think Poole does a great job as Stallman there. And that sort of acting can be difficult. I'm being taken control of. Now, it's interesting because the alternative world Stallman had everybody in there with him and he infected them, whereas this one has sent people out. And I wonder if that's a slight nod to the fact that even though he's doing what he's doing, he can't bring himself... He's a bit nicer, this one, because he won't kill the other people. There's Derek Martin and Terry Walsh being knocked out there. And I spoke to Derek on the phone a couple of days ago. There's Derek. Charlie Slater from EastEnders, 88. He told me his doctor says he's going to live to 100, which I do hope so, because Derek is one of the nicest men you could meet. Why am I talking about an extra? Because he went on to have a great career. Law and Order, brilliant piece of television, which is available on not Law and Order, the Dick Wolf or the Chris Chibnall things much later. This was showed the dark side, and it cast a lot of non-professional actors or stuntmen in the lead parts. G.F. Newman and was sort of improvised and very naturalistic. And Derek didn't know he was going to be the star of it. He thought he was just one of many, but actually he was very much the star of it as this very corrupt copper, which was quite a groundbreaking thing to be showing in the late 70s. And didn't look back, and has had a great career as an actor, having started as an extra and a stuntman. And so I rang Derek to chat about Roy Scammell, who, as we know, has passed away very recently. And Derek said he thought Roy was one of the best. So yeah, thanks Derek. What a nice guy. And it's lovely seeing him pop up in various bits of Doctor Who's. And he said he just had that's actually, there's a photo of him and Terry Walsh being knocked out by Pertwee with the Venusian Aikido, and he'd just been sent a load of those sign. Now, interesting, when Stallman, who is now on film, so not all of the side bits of the drills are models, because there was a bit there. When Stallman covers himself in the green, you see when Harry Slocum does it in episode 1, when he touches it, it burns and you get a spoosh of smoke, it's singed. And that to me is a sort of Douglas Camfield touch. Oh, well, if it burns, we need a bit of smoke, a little bit of extra work, a little bit of a special effect. So I always think it's a slight compromise when we don't have Camfield in episode 7 and there's no burning, as it were, when Stallman touches the green stuff. I mean, it would be difficult to do it with the face, but so maybe it wouldn't have happened even if Camfield had still been at the helm. But again, I think of it. I think of that as not as good as when Slocum does it in episode 1. So Starman dead, and that's Olaf Pooley in the makeup again. And I remember my brother walking in on this one, and saying that he thought that the episode was a bit of a damp squib because they build up over a 7-part. I remember him doing the same with Ambassadors of Death as well. Was I always watching that? I don't know if I did sometimes strategically place episodes for my brothers to walk in on so that they'd get. I've told you this before, but I certainly think I have felt in the past that the climaxes of the Pertwee 7-parters are perhaps not quite as good as what they build up to, because, particularly in the case of Inferno, we actually have the end of the world. And I think I always had that, received wisdom that this was not as good as it could have been because Douglas Camfield had said so, and because, but I think it meant that one started to see things that perhaps weren't true, like the fact that they wouldn't have had smoke coming out of Stallman's phaser, but they might have had it when he touched the green stuff, but I don't know. But I do like the fact that it stops at minus 30 seconds and not at 1. But actually, the reason it stops at 1, normally, in dramatic moments, is because 1 is much more exciting than 30. So whilst I sort of go, oh, well done, yeah, they didn't go for the cliche, it does mean that there's no real climax as such, is there? I mean, Stallman just comes out and gets shot, really. And then there's that extra bit where Greg and the Doctor have to stop the countdown, and they stop it at 30. But of course, the real climax to the story is the cliffhanger the week before. And I think, I don't know, probably what we'd have now is you'd have that final bit that the Doctor and Greg do. So somebody would have to go into somewhere hot, and perhaps somebody would have had to sacrifice their life. There'd have been an added moment of peril and sacrifice, I think, in order for this to be a bit more bells and whistles than it actually is. But I don't mind because we have the whole thing, and there are plenty of beautiful moments in this. I worried that this would be a little bit, as I say, a bit of a tricky damp squib, but I've enjoyed this episode very much. I think there's enough. I like the characters standing up to Stallman, and getting the backbone. There's some funny bits. This is jolly. Pertwee is really good, even though he spends half the episode asleep. John Pertwee becomes the Doctor so quickly, and he's so good at it. And I like this gutsy early version, the Buffon level 1. And this, yes, he's going to do the testy thing. And of course there's a sort of real steel by that as well, because he's actually seen a terrible version of the Brigadier, and he's I think, and the Mind of Evil is more explicit about this. What happened to him in the world of the alternative world of Inferno, I think, really affects him. even if it's just because John Pertwee's got a cold this week. I think you really do buy that whatever happened to him there has sort of scarred him, and that slightly scarred, his conduct towards the Brigadier, who, let's face it, as a military man, does have the capabilities within him to do terrible things, and in another world enjoys doing those terrible things, which is a frightening thing. But it talks of, would you have made the trains run on time if you were told to? Well, you probably would have done. And which is why I am very cautious about a lot of today's younger social commentators who yell at the past. You go, don't cast yourself the hero of a film you're not in, because you're not saying, if you'd worked at the BBC in the late 1970s, would you have said, no, we must not cast a Caucasian actor as Lee Sen Chang? I don't think you would have done, and I think it's disingenuous to say that that's the case. So circumstance. We must be grateful for the circumstances we find ourselves in, because who knows what we might do were circumstances different. And I think this story, throws up that very starkly and very, very interestingly. But on top of that, it's Doctor Who as disaster movie, and it's Doctor Who as Mirror Universe episode. And on top of that, it's season 7, gritty, exciting, hardware heavy, plausible. We're going to be as realistic as possible within the confines of what we do. Who? It's cracking. Inferno, I love you. You set me on fire. So I've got to choose two things and hope that Jeremy Radick chooses both of them. And you know what? I know what they're going to be. The one for this particular episode is John Pertwee's observation that free will is not an illusion after all. And I mean, I think it ties in. I mean, Jeremy's already chosen John Pertwee's performance in a previous episode, but also, interesting, because I'd sort of got it in my head that Pert was just asleep in that episode. He's really good in that episode, and what the Doctor gets to do is really important. And I so buy the fact that he's come from last week's episode. Do you know what I mean? I think that the way that lays heavy on him, but I think that musing that he has and the observation and the joke about it being wonderful news that Sir Keith isn't dead. So free will is not an illusion after all, but generally the whole Dr. Pertwee vibe as he's emerging from the other world. And my thing for the whole story is the sound, is that ever-present, particularly in the alternative world, but the ever-present drilling, but then the distant explosions and the shaking of the world outside, the oncoming apocalypse, but also those primordial screams, the primal, tinnitus from the dawn of time that Stallman has. The soundscape, I think, is really impressive. And as I say, besides the music of Doctor Who, which is very important to it, I think the sound in a lot of the special sound, the sound in Doctor Who is often underestimated and under-discussed. And it's not a medium I can be particularly eloquent about, because it's not my area, but that doesn't mean I don't acknowledge it and appreciate it. There's no way Jeremy's going to have chosen those. Well, certainly not. Well, no. Let's see, eh?
Whoa. Well, hey, it's Jeremy. I am back from that terrifying sojourn, real harrowing experience in that duplicate world. Whew. I was able to figure out how to stop the drilling and contain the gases, and I told the scientist drilling in my backyard to knock it off, and I think we've successfully averted disaster. But whew, what an experience. I don't even know what to say. So, final episode of Inferno. I think probably my favorite moment is the line that John Pertwee says about free will not being an illusion after all. It's a wonderful moment for Doctor Who. It's kind of magical. It's a moment that John Pertwee's really good at delivering. It's heartfelt, and it's those moments of charm that he always talked about, and that's a real moment of charm. And I just think it's so, um, it makes it kind of have a little more heft, and it kind of lightens everything that's happened, that's been on the whole rather, um, you know, just sort of engrossing and tense, and in some ways it could be bleak, but the fact that he, you know, fails to save this world and comes back and finds that fate and destiny aren't set in stone, that the actions of people have meaning, and that those actions, you know, aren't part of some cosmic design, that people have agency and that their choices matter. And it's a wonderful thing. It's a sophisticated point for the show to make. And so that's my favorite moment of the episode. So now, what's my last kind of favorite thing about the overall story? It's just Inferno to me occupies a really singular place. I love season 7 of Doctor Who. I think it's like what I call the shoulder seasons, those moments where production teams overlap, and an outgoing production team kind of sticks an incoming production team with a series of plans that maybe that incoming production team doesn't want to do. And that's definitely the case here, that season 7 was planned and commissioned, and Barry Letts, producer, and Terrence Dicks, the script editor, kind of didn't like what they were stuck with, but they were stuck with it. And over time, over the course of that season, it becomes this melange of kind of opposing artistic viewpoints. And season 7 is sort of, over time grows more towards what the show would become. Everything becomes a little more cozy, a little warmer, a little less kind of, you know, clean and sophisticated, which isn't a bad thing. I think that it starts to remember that it's a show for the whole family, and whereas something like Ambassadors of Death, for instance, which I love, there's not necessarily a ton in there for the littles, to hide around, but this one's got werewolves, so you really feel like there's this great kind of collaboration going on of a concept that the current production team doesn't love, but they're making the best with. They're even the 7 episode stories that they're stuck with, which I'm sure they hated because it's so long. In this particular story in Inferno, because Don Houghton didn't have the parallel world storyline, and Terrence Dicks kind of put it in there in order to stretch out the episodes. It's just a necessity being the mother of invention, and delivering this thing that fits in so perfectly. It's like a little capsule of what season 8 and season 9 and really the rest of the unit era is going to be, and the sort of earlier, more sophisticated, more challenging, sort of slightly more adult series that this season started out being. So that's kind of my favorite thing. It's one of the reasons why I love Inferno so much, is it really kind of has a singular feel to it. It doesn't feel like anything else. And yeah, and so that's it.
Oh, well, we'll see how it plugs. Interesting, yeah. Okay, well, 5-3 to Jeremy, but I'm glad the free will went. Yeah, but I'm glad I chose the sound, because I actually nearly chose the sound in episode 1, but it seems appropriate to have it because it stretches over the whole thing, and at least I'm not choosing an actor, and I could have chosen pretty much any one of those actors, but I think particularly Pooley and Newark, and Nick Courtney, and John Pertwee. I think those four are magnificent, but I think it's strong across the board. And yeah, I do. Yes, the fact that isn't it interesting that some of Doctor Who's finest moments are when people are saddled with something they don't particularly want to be doing, or that they don't think are particularly good. seem to recall with Robots of Death, nobody was particularly happy with the script, and the script is excellent. So works really hard to go against what they thought were its cliches or shortcomings or whatever. And Brain of Morbius was always seen as a compromise. It's not what we wanted to do, and then became so quite often, Doctor Who is necessity being the mother of invention when you're making something you don't like. But I love season 7. But it's when he said about Ambassadors of Death, which I love, and had always been sort of talked of as being this, this one of the weaker Pertwee stories, because it never quite hung together. That actually, as it turns out, was largely a productions team's point of view. And when I first watched it, wow, hang on, this is supposed to be the Duff one, and it was one of the last stories I watched as a result of that. I wasn't particularly bothered about getting it, and I think it's fantastic. And a friend of mine, who's one of the first people who agreed to do this, who chose Ambassadors of Death, and then loads of other friends of mine chose, and I said, you can't do it, it's somebody else doing it. He still hasn't sent me the video, but I know he's doing it. But that will have to wait a while, because I'll have to put a gap between this and it. But what got me thinking when he mentioned Ambassadors, and I guess a bit like about some of the things that one enjoys about this, is because it exists in the whole pantheon of Doctor Who. And I wonder if at the time I'd watched Ambassadors of Death, with its lack of monsters and with its 7-episode length and all of that, and the fact that it was only one of 4 stories that year, if I'd have been sweating and going, oh, but hang on, what if the general public don't like this? What if my this is going to be the end of Doctor Who? If I'd have liked it as much as the fact that when I viewed Ambassadors of Death, it's whether it was good or not had no impact on the future of Doctor Who, because it was in my past. And so I wonder if that's why I have to have a certain amount of distance between episodes and actually relaxing and enjoying them for what they are, not for what they represent to the future of Doctor Who and to the outside world. So I think the message there is one should get a grip and not worry about things, and what might happen, because what might happen, that might just happen in an alternative universe, and this one will be fine. But I do like Inferno. I think it's a classic. I thank Jeremy so much for going to town, and I'm sorry in the audio version of this you can't see his eye patch and his moustache. Sorry, not his, platoon underleader Radick's, from when we had the sojourn into the alternative to Warp 2 of Radick World. So I hope you enjoyed Inferno. I worried episode 7 would be a damp squib, and it wasn't at all. It's a true classic of Doctor Who. I don't think there's much wrong with it. I would have gone, if I just had a lazy sort of off the top of my head about Inferno, I'd have gone, yeah, it's great, but the monsters are a bit crap. But actually, I think the monsters are fine. Occasionally their teeth are a bit obvious that they're wearing false teeth, and it's a risky look, the old long hair, long beard look, but actually it's consistent with werewolfery. Or it's all the rage in Lycanthroville. And actually on the quality that I'm watching and on the size of screen that I'm watching, I was pretty happy with them. So yeah, one of Doctor Who's all-time greats, I would say. Some of the best cliffhangers the series has ever done. The alternative world is a stroke of genius and is brilliantly carried off. So my thanks to Jeremy, who I'm going to let see out the episode by plugging his thangs. You will join me for another one of these, or you can just jump sideways to an alternative dimension where I spend 7 episodes watching Doctor Who and slagging it off whilst wearing an eye patch, and then shooting everybody at the end. But if you haven't got the means to get there, just stay with me now as we listen to what Jeremy Radick from the Doctor Who TV movie, presumably he answered the right questions in exams, and is doing what he's doing now, which you're going to find out about.
So you also suggested that I do some plugs, so I'm going to do some plugs. If you're interested in following me on Twitter, my handle is @Jeremy Radick, and that's where you're going to find news about anything that I'm doing. which isn't, terribly much right now. I'm not acting anymore. This is the first acting in this long series of sketches that I've done in some time. So I hope you enjoyed it. I hope it wasn't too terrible. But I am a part-time editor of comic books. I edited an Image Comics series called Rose, which if you go to the Image Comics website, I'm sure you could order some trades, or it's available also wherever digital comics are sold. Comixology. It was written by Meredith Finch and with art by Iguara, and it's a terrific fantasy series if you love it. So I recommend you going there, and I was really proud to edit that. And I've also edited another original graphic novel for writer Meredith Finch, this time with artist Colin Dwyer, called The Book of Ruth, which is a adaptation of the Bible's Book of Ruth, but set in Depression-era United States. And it's a really interesting project. If that sort of interests you, then head on over to cavepicturespublishing.com and order that. It's a beautiful book with terrific artwork and an inspiring message. I was really proud to work on it. And any further projects you can catch up with by following me on Twitter. So thanks so much for joining me and having me on this show. Toby, it was a real pleasure. And I hope you enjoyed listening to this nonsense as much as I did making it. And talk to you soon. All right.
Oh, well, I said I'd leave it to him, but I've kept the cameras and the mic running. So thanks to Jeremy. Go and check out his things, and we'll see you some other time. Ta-ta. Thanks so much for listening to Happy Times and Places with me, Toby Hadoke, and my special guest, Jeremy Radick, who I'm very grateful to. We've never met. He's been in Doctor Who. I'm honoured by his presence, and he went above and beyond the call of duty. He can be found on Twitter at Jeremy Radick. I would also like to thank patrons who make these podcasts possible. They include Luke Atkins, Peter Adamson, Will Brooks, Peter Burns, Richard Byatt, Alex Kafajoglu, Paul Carnahan, Paul Carrington, Andy Case, Richard Chalk, John Curley, Mark Dakin, Ian Gillespie, James Gould, Lisa C. Greco, Dave Hoskin, Jessica Jones, Andrew Jordan, Clive Lewis, Guy Lambert, James Lark, Gavin McLean, Dave Matthewman, John McClay, Rossa McPhillips, Stuart Mitchell, and Nathan Moore. The music for this podcast is by Dave Gates, and the artwork has been done by Dylan Patterson. If you would like to join the list of patrons, you can do so at patreon.com/Toby Hadoke. The tiers start from as little as £3 a month, although you get a 10% discount off that if you do a whole year in advance, and you get access to early releases and exclusive material and various other bits and bobs of goodies. If you can't do that, there's a coffee option, or Ko-fi, Ko-fi, kofi.com/Toby Hadoke, where you can do a one-off payment if you think I deserve one occasionally. But I know that times are tough, and there's been a real squeeze, and not everybody can afford to contribute, and I totally understand that. I am more than grateful to you just for listening. However, if you would like to show your appreciation, you could go to your podcast outlet and give this a 5-star review, and perhaps a couple of nice lines as well, because that really helps to get the message out there about these things. And you don't want to be part of an exclusive club, do you? Oh, you probably do. All right, but I need the affirmation. I'm very needy. I need my algorithms looking as tip-top as possible, because it can be quite embarrassing when you parade them and they look a bit shabby. So unshab my algorithms with those 5 stars and those lovely words. Thank you so much. You can follow me on Twitter at Toby Hadoke. These podcasts have their own feed at Hadoke Podcasts. I've also got a blog at www.tobyhadoke.com where I have a mailing list too. And I do live comedy in Manchester at Excess Malarkey every Tuesday, and that has a monthly online show on twitch.tv/Excess Malarkey on the first Sunday of every month from August 2021, because we've been online during the pandemic, but we're back to business now. The club's been running 24 years, and it's me and usually 3 or 4 acts from the international comedy circuit, and is definitely worth your time. Unless you don't like things like that, in which case it's not.